Welcome to Teachers Talking Teaching, where we celebrate and elevate the art of teaching.
We're back with language arts and computer science teacher Stacy Ruffer. So thanks for coming back with us and talking with us more about what is currently exciting you in your practice, or what's something you're currently studying or learning about.
Yeah. After 22 years, I always have to think, how can I keep this both enjoyable for me and also not just kind of rest on my laurels and be like, oh, this worked 20 years ago, so I'll just keep teaching it. I'm sure you guys have had that same experience of looking back over something you taught 15 years ago and you're like, oh no, what was I thinking? That's a terrible way of doing it.
Can I go apologize to
Can I call those 30-year-olds up now? Right. And so, in English, one thing I've done that's kind of kept me going is I'm in a book club with about 10 or 15 other teachers from not just our school, but a middle school and other high schools in the district. And we get together about every other month, and we kind of take turns choosing. We usually choose a long, difficult text, and then we choose something shorter. And sometimes that shorter one is like a film at the Lyric, and we talk about that. And it's just, doing homework for fun is kind of what it comes down to. And, doing stuff that we ask students to do anyway, like read something that's difficult and be prepared to talk about it. And it's fun. And that part kind of really keeps me going. I enjoy that a lot. For computer science, a lot of what I've been doing is, the best thing about computer science is, and I tell students this, I'm like, so much stuff is out there that you can just go do for free. Like if you say to yourself, like, I want to learn Java, there's dozens and dozens of courses that you don't have to go to college. You don't have to go to high school to do it. You can just crank it on your own. So I purchased for a tiny amount a JavaScript course. It's like a 200-hour course, and then I'm working to get an industry certification in it next year sometime. My goal is to crank it out this year, finish it up over the summer, and then take the test probably in the fall, which is part of my CTE credential as well. And it's beyond the scope of what I do in class, but at the same time, it's going to help me. When kids ask those questions, a lot of times my answer is like, it's beyond the scope of this class, and I don't know the answer to that, right? And so they're like, oh, okay. But be able to say like, oh, at least I know where you're going with this. We'll steer back towards class, but this would answer that question. Another thing I've kind of got a chance to do that I enjoy is we started a coding club about 2 years ago. So we meet. That one's kind of an easy one. We meet like every Wednesday at lunch, and it kind of goes different directions this week. Sometimes the kid's like, hey, we want to learn HTML. So one of the kids like, oh, I know HTML, and he kind of runs the show, and I just kind of sit back and learn. We also started a Computer Science Honor Society this year, which is a nationally recognized honor society, kind of in the lines of like National Honor Society. And students are required to have 18 hours of volunteer work within computer science field. So that could be helping other kids out, running lessons in class, getting into elementary schools, and working with teachers there. And that part is really neat because while I'm there, it's very much a student-driven thing. And so in the first semester, we ran something called a hackathon. And a hackathon is not about hacking. That's kind of what I had to explain to my administration. We're not getting into
lessons in how to.
We're not getting into our district's website. A hackathon is kind of like an ideation concept where students spend 6-8 hours together. They get kind of a basic assignment and say, make something. And we had about 40 kids that showed up for the first one, which was really neat. And we did it a Friday night from like 4 to 10 p.m., which was really neat, where my CSHS board kind of ran it. And they said, this year's theme is education, right? And they're like, you have 2 hours with an hour of zero computer work, just talking. And you have to say like, if you were making an app, if you were making a program, if you were to develop something in technology that has to do with education, what would you create? And we had kids all over the place. Like some kids then an hour later were like, cool. And they were just hard coding, stuff that was beyond I could even understand, right? I have other kids who are like zero experience in coding. So we're going to make a website or we're going to make it a presentation of some sort. So I had really cool ones of kind of an online attendance checker that is a little bit more secure than what our students or that we currently have in the district, where kids use their phones and I send them a separate app, and so then you don't have they all do it for you. I'm not logging into our website and clicking attendance for everyone.
I think every teacher everywhere would be like, if I don't have to take attendance.
I had other ones where kids were using the new ChatGPT to like help students and teachers develop kind of like interesting lessons and answers to those lessons, which was pretty neat. In fact, one of our groups took their idea and they just won the Congressional App Challenge that Jonah Geese runs.
Oh my gosh.
They basically designed an app that was kind of based on the attendance one, and sent it off, and now they have their name on a plaque somewhere in Washington, D.C., and, I think there's more stuff to come where they can hang out with the geese, and that should be pretty cool. So that's a really neat thing. We also are running, this semester, our big computer science thing is something called Code Wars. Hewlett-Packard runs a worldwide competition. It's usually the first week in May. This is the first year since COVID that we can actually do it in person, which is really neat. Kids are put in teams of 3, and they do a series of increasingly difficult coding challenges, where the first one is something that a kid in an intro computer science class can do, and the one that's worth 50 points is something that I don't even know what they're asking me to do, right? It's a pretty cool thing. And so kids spend the whole day at HP and get free food, and like every 20 minutes they give out a free laptop or a free computer. Like it's such a neat. I had one of my students last year won like a $6,000 computer setup with a monitor and a screen and the whole desktop and an optical mouse. It was really neat. And just seeing, the first year we did, I think we had one team of 3. That was about 4 years ago. And now I had to have like tryouts and turn like 6 kids away because I can only put so many, and it's getting big. I'm really enjoying it. And so that, just seeing kids go through those stuff, that is such a fun experience. I think is kind of what keeps me going. It's worth, any of the work I have to do that goes into it becomes worth it when they're like, yeah, guess what I did. That part is really neat.
And to connect it to the outside world and even just within our community, because we're fortunate enough to have tech giants right here in our community. So that's awesome.
That is, and it must maybe be a really great connection for kids for post-graduation. I have this experience at HP. Yep. I could see myself working there, and to make that connection and link for them for career options.
Yeah, and a lot of, especially with seniors, they're starting to think like, oh, I have to go beyond this building that I'm in right now. So when they're reaching out, HP also did another thing in the spring called Day of Industry, or in the fall called Day of Industry, where students got to go in and kind of tour the facilities and talk to people that were them in 5 years, right? Oh, I got hired here 2 years ago. I went to college in Florida and I studied computer science, and this is how it works. It is funny seeing high school kids ask the questions that we as adults wouldn't, like, well, so how much do you get paid right away? You're like, I wouldn't have asked that, at least not right away. It's kind of funny, like that learning experience of like, hey, that's probably not something you want to ask right away. Let's talk about what they did to get here first, and then you can figure that out later. But just seeing kids, in English, when they figure out the theme of that poem, and they're like, oh, and they light up and like, that's amazing. Or in computer science, when a student is like, it finally works. Like, I've been doing this for 4 hours and I'm butting my head against the screen, and you hit run and it does what it's supposed to do. Like, that's such a cool experience for them and for me.
Satisfying too.
It is.
All of the both creative and knowledge parts coming into making something that does something that improves, a situation for a teacher or for a kid. How do kids bring ideas into your classroom? Do they get to, say, I'd really like to make this?
Sure. Especially once we, teaching AP classes, the way the schedule is set up, you usually have 3 or 4 weeks at the end post AP test where you're like, what am I going to do with all this time? And so, I start off with like, hey, you're going to make a video game. And just mostly because kids hear video game, like, cool, this is going to be really fun. Then eventually kids like take it wherever which way they're going, which is kind of neat. Teaching English, I've taught creative writing for years. I don't have any this year, but like, you get 2 types of kids in creative writing. You get the kids who are like, hey, I need this to graduate. Tell me what I have to do. And then they have the freshman who comes in and is like, will you please read my 30-page Harry Potter fanfic that I've been doing? And just like being able to steer that enthusiasm to like, hey, this is really good. I'm not going to read it all because I don't have time. But at the same time, like, this is cool. Let's keep going, right? The computer science kids, for me, it's almost having them explain to me what they're doing. The kid's like, hey, I made this database that does X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, now let's start. What is a database? What do you mean by this? And then just letting them geek out on it. They want a voice that they want to have their voice heard by someone that's maybe not their parent or their immediate friend group. And just like me saying like, this is cool. Like, keep going. I like it. Right. And just seeing kids like that prompt, and they like that response.
Yeah. And we talk a lot on here about building relationships with kids. And it seems like you teach 2 subjects that allow you opportunities to talk with kids. So yeah, like what are other ways that you feel like that you put that emphasis in your class, and how do you find time for it? Because I'm sure you're like, I get these kids for this short amount of time each day. And
Sure. I think that, after 20 plus years is like getting to know, and it sounds like such a cheesy thing, but like you really get to know at least one cool thing about a kid, right? And so a lot of this is like, I'll lecture for 20 minutes and then they're working on their essay. So I'm walking around, I'm like, hey, Steamboat, do you go to Steamboat often? Just like little things like that to prompt that conversation. My first couple years, I think I feel like I played it close to the chest about who I was. And then like opening up more and more, kids are like, oh, I also play video games or mountain bike or any of the things that I like to do. And just talking to kids like they're people, believe it or not. And I think kids appreciate that, right? We're like, hey, Ms. Ruffer, guess what I just did? I went mountain biking. We talked about that trail. And that's just such a neat way to bond with kids. I love going to, their sporting events, and I love going to the plays, because just seeing them in a totally different element, especially when it surprises me. I'm like, wow, you are amazing at basketball. I had absolutely no idea, right? Or, going to a play, a student who I didn't even know was involved in drama, and I went to see the school play. I'm like, holy crap, she's the star. And then running into the hallway like, Anna, you're amazing. And she's like, oh, thanks. That's such a cool part of it too, where like knowing that as much as I think my class is the most important part of the day, of course it's not, right? That they have whole other things going on. And it's just really neat to see that part of like a well-rounded kid.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated to hear how high schools do it, because high school teachers do it, because I have them all day.
Sure.
I'm an elementary teacher, so it seems like an extra challenge to figure out, because you also have more students.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So the course of several classes, and so you probably have a lot of seniors in your classes.
Yeah.
So are some of the conversations and relationships building that you do with kids seeing like, I see a talent or a gift in you? Have you thought about this being a pathway for
Sure.
you?
Especially I think in the computer science, because many kids that are doing computer science are already thinking like, I'm doing this because they're choosing to take that class as opposed to like English, where they have to take an English class. Most of the kids that are taking those top AP classes are at least in their mind like, I could do this. I could do this for college and as a career. And so in that way, it's like we're always trying to bring in guest speakers and saying like, hey, I got somebody from HP, I got a CSU professor who's willing to come in and talk, right? Just getting kids to come to that part of it. And for English, it hurts my heart as an English major to know that almost nobody's going to be an English major anymore, right? But knowing like the skills that I'm teaching you don't just apply to like analyzing literature. Like you're gonna have to do a deep reading of any textbook, or if you're going to business school, like you have to understand how can you read something that's difficult and convey that back, whether it's in a formal essay or a PowerPoint presentation. Like we're all doing kind of those basic tools that are going to lead them somewhere else.
And the writing too.
I
mean, I think if there's anything that I feel like every kid needs to go into college with, it's being able to write. So English teachers, kudos to them for. Because you're right, we mentioned in your origin story the grading piece of English.
Sure, sure.
Can eat you alive.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, you're at this. You mentioned earlier, like ChatGPT. We were kind of talking before earlier off air that it's one of those things that's kind of like starting to freak out the education world, and nobody knows quite where this is going to go, and all the AI stuff that's coming online. And you're at this interesting. Merger of those two worlds, like the technology world seeing it as a good thing automatically, and the English world going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do when kids turn in an essay they didn't even touch?
Sure.
So, like, talk about, like, where are you at on that?
Well, I mean, kind of coincidentally, in my college writing class right now, we just finished a book called The Shallows, which is about, and the subtitle is the internet destroying us? And it was written like 10 or 15 years ago, so it's a tiny bit dated. But he makes the argument that the internet stops us from thinking deeply because it trains us to be quick and responsive and multitasking, and that's clearly bad, right? And then with this ChatGPT, the question we kind of ask in that class is like, is the internet, and now is ChatGPT, is it just another technology in a long line of technologies that people have been saying the sky is falling since the birth of the printing press, right? talking about the ChatGPT, one of my friends sent me an article, and he's like, it was in the like early 80s, and it was New York City public school teachers were striking for one day, demanding that calculators would not be allowed in the classroom. Right? And now, like, we wouldn't even blink. Like, of course they use calculators, right?
Yeah.
So is the internet, or actually is ChatGPT, gonna destroy us all, or is it just one more thing that we're as teachers are gonna have to bring in, talk about, and discuss? I think the biggest concern, and not even this one, but whatever the next ones as they get better and better, the biggest concern I think is like, are kids gonna plagiarize? And the answer is, of course. Like, there always will be kids that will do that, right? I think most don't, right? At least in my experience, I think the vast majority don't, because like, you know, keeping up with type me an essay about Hamlet, turning that in when 27 kids or 27,000 kids are typing that same thing in, like, it's going to eventually show up as like, hey, this is the same one as 26,000 other kids. Clearly you got this from ChatGPT. And I actually used it in my class the other day because I had my students write an essay about the Shallows book. It's called a summary response essay, where it's like 2 or 3 pages explaining the entire content of the book, and then 4 or 5 pages explaining, like, what is your response? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Analyze how effective it is. And I just copy and pasted my exact prompt into ChatGPT in front of the class and put it up there. And we read it, and it wasn't wrong. Like, it was a pretty good summary. But all the kids were like, it was just okay. It's like a C or D level essay. Like,
no voice,
it's not wrong. There's no voice.
Yeah.
It doesn't use quotes. It's all stuff that clearly they just kind of scraped together from other websites. And again, wasn't wrong, but it didn't really have any heart, right? And I think that a lot of teachers that are really freaking out about it, like, maybe haven't even played with it that much yet, because it could be a cool teaching tool, right?
Yeah.
I tell my students, like, Wikipedia is a really, really good place to start, right? Because someone's done the research.
Yeah.
No, of course not. I mean, mostly it's right. We know Wikipedia is like mostly right, and a lot of times there's a million hyperlinks that'll take us to better places. And so, like, as opposed to saying like, never go on Wikipedia, I don't think that's reality, because I use Wikipedia. If I was teaching a book for the very first time, one of the first things I would do is go online and be like, okay, what do I need to know about this book? Right? And why would I tell kids that they can't do that? Because of course they should do that. They should learn all those tools. The problem is when they're saying like, well, this is the only thing I'm going to do. I'm only going to research on Wikipedia. I'm only going to use Cliff Notes. And it's kind of convincing them that there's value in the effort. And it's not just about getting a pretty good result on a test. Like, you know, you're going through something, and that's why we're learning.
Yeah. Hopefully teaching them to critical think.
Yeah.
Along the way,
Right. That analysis piece of, you know, I don't think our AI is quite there yet to put the heart and the analysis in that a human can.
Sure.
But I'm sure it's, you know, just around the corner.
It probably is. Yes.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But
Sure.
for right now, you know, we'll embrace the ChatGPT world and help the kids understand, like, there's a lot of value in doing the learning for yourself too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Stacy, for joining us. We really appreciate learning about your genius on both sides of the brain of English and computer science.
Thank you for having me. This is really neat.
Yeah.
If you liked what you heard today, go to our Facebook page and like and subscribe. You can also go to YouTube and join our YouTube channel, as well as listen to us on your favorite podcasting app.
Elementary principals, and oh my gosh, it was 11 candidates.
Oh my.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Did you do, because there's quite a few positions.
There's
Did you
3
do
positions.
any together?
We did them all together. Together.
So you did. So 11 candidates, and they could get
Yes.
any one of the
Oh, okay.
jobs. That's a smart way.